I'm Ibi Syed.
I'm Sean Collins.
And this is Numbers and Narratives. Paul, thanks so much for coming on the podcast. Super excited to have you. Aampe is a really cool company. Do you want to give us a quick primer on you, your background, when you started Aampe and what Aampe does?
Happy to do that, and thank you for putting this together and inviting me. So I've spent most of my career in what we call data science. My background in academic research was in computational social science and cognitive science. I built data systems for the U.S. Department of Defense in the late 2000s, kind of going back and forth between Afghanistan and DC. And then have been in consumer mobile technology for about the last 12 years, mostly in Asia, living in Singapore and India. Co-founded a FinTech startup in India. It's now one of the largest credit providers in that market, in that country. Was acquired in 2019. And then I started Aampe a couple of years later with two other machine learning scientists. And what Aampe is doing is just creating a form of reinforcement learning infrastructure. And really what that means is that our infrastructure sits on top of event stream data and generates synthetic agents that then create content and create product experiences for users that are sort of cross-border and cross-channel. So wherever you're interacting with your customers, those agents are guiding a process of creating content for them and sort of surfacing it for them in ways that are relevant, useful, timely, etc. We're a global company. We have folks in 9 or 10 countries now, customers in 20 plus. We're backed by Peak 15, which was formerly Sequoia in Southeast Asia, and Matrix Partners. I think that's a summary.
Super cool. I will say that I'm talking to Alex, one of your sales guys, and I'm looking very forward to running a pilot with you and getting you to be part of our tech stack. So I'm super
I'm thrilled to hear that, Sean. That would be awesome. Excited.
But so, first things first, before we try and get tactical and figure out how people can focus on send time, why should people care about send time, and what are sort of the factors that go into that make it a complex topic that requires computational learning and data science?
So I think sort of why should people care about time in their business? And I'll give you just a very concrete example from when we were building PaySense. So PaySense is a mobile app that allowed you to apply for a loan and get that loan and then pay it back over time and build a credit profile. And in India, we were specifically targeting a population, which is sort of 70% of our buyers didn't have formal credit. So they didn't have loans in the past from a formal provider. Maybe they'd taken it out from a friend or a family member that, borrowed before, but not in a formal way. And this particular population is primarily urban. They do white collar work. And so they get paychecks into their bank account, et cetera. So, but haven't had, like I said, a formal credit product. So now think about that business of lending to someone. And that business is constrained by certain institutional processes, bank processes, financial processes, et cetera. And so when you provision a loan, the normal process is to have a loan application date and then to have a repayment date. And usually the repayment date is highly structured. So it'll be like the third of the month. Okay. And everyone follows on that structure because that's the way your business operates and its financial reporting operates, et cetera. So as a user, I can come in on the 15th of the month, I can come out on the 3rd of the month, I can come out whatever, but my due date is going to be structured on the 3rd of the month. Our customers' financial lives are cyclical. Most of our lives are cyclical. And if you think about it, the reason time matters in some sense is because there is some predictability to it, and that predictability is cyclical. So just take a 24-hour day. We have mornings, afternoons, and evenings, right? And there's some repeatability to morning, afternoon, and evening across a week, and our weeks are cyclical too. So we have 7 days, we do things on the weekends, we do things on the weekdays. If that wasn't true, then there would be no machine learning in the world you could do. There would be no analytics you could do that would be useful at all, because time would be random, but it isn't. We are patterned, right? So our financial lives are often, especially people who live from paycheck to paycheck, right? They're not very wealthy. They live on a monthly cyclical process. And so they get paid every month, and then they spend money every month, and then they have a repayment date every month, and then they get paid every month, right? And so if you can imagine like plotting their bank account on a plot over a 31-day period, right? So take every month, normalize it to day of the month, and look at their bank account, you would see for any given person like a curve, because you get paid, and when you get paid, you have the most money in your bank account, and then you draw down on it. All right. And now really important, because these people don't have huge savings. They are basically getting paid and then spending everything. Okay. Now, where this starts to get interesting is the fact that the way you get paid depends on, your job, et cetera. The specifics of most of these kind of white collar workers who work at, like, so they call centers or other business centers within an urban landscape, would often be that they would be paid, let's say on the 13th of the month, or the 21st of the month, or the 1st of the month. Now, they have complex lives. They have families, they're traveling across the city, et cetera. Our objective is to make their financial life better. Their problem is that they have to navigate a lot of needs and wants and interests in order to make sure that they have enough money at the end of the month to pay their bills. Because again, they're drawing down it. And what do we experience as humans? We experience temptation, we experience needs that are unexpected, et cetera. So we might want to go to the movies or purchase that extra thing. And we have to keep in mind that, okay, wait a second, we have this responsibility and this responsibility and this responsibility. So one of the job is to figure out, like, all right, so how do you predict whether a person is going to repay you? But what you would really like to do using that technology is to figure out how you can help them increase their probability of repayment, right? You don't want to just predict it, you want to increase it. So one way to do that is actually to think about the timing of the repayment. See, if everybody's repaying on the 3rd of the month, if you get paid on the 1st of the month, it's kind of great, because you get paid on the 1st of the month, or maybe let's take a more classically realistic scenario. You get paid at the end of the month. So you get paid on the 29th. Okay. So most money in your bank account when you get paid, and then you draw it down. So by the 3rd, there's still a lot of money in. Now, how does the repayment process work? You want to automate it, because that de-risks things. So you set up an auto debit. You connect to their bank account, and that means we have the permission to debit your bank account for $200, right? So if your payment is scheduled on the 3rd of the month, that's pretty good, because you were paid on the 31st, and you pay it, we can draw money. But imagine you're paid on the 10th of the month. Now, you've been spending money, and the whole point of auto debiting is that you don't have to actively think about it, given all the other things you have to think about. So when you think about it, you're kind of like down to tens of dollars or something. Like that's the metric, that's the margin that you're working with. It ends up being, if you try to auto debit somebody's bank account when they don't have money in their account, you actually compound the problem, because now they have to pay a bank penalty on the fact that they have less money in their account, right? So you see, like time matters. If you're trying to remove cognitive effort for somebody, and you're trying to figure out how to remind them or even to get them to repay, time matters. If we structure a payment on the 3rd, and that's the end of their financial cycle, we've basically structured it exactly when they're least likely to have money in their account.
Yeah.
Whereas if you take it out, right? So what you can do is figure out, like, when you want to send those reminders, but also could you even restructure the payment date for them so that it reflects their financial life? And could you do that in a way which, because you have their bank transaction data, could you learn that? So that's an example, because I think that at a deeper level, time, we want to understand why time matters in general for your particular product and business. I'm using the case of lending, but I think you could use examples like this in any core consumer business. And that just gives you an example of like fundamentally why it matters. And then what you want is data and technology to help maximize the chance of success for that customer, whatever your domain is. So hopefully I didn't go too long on that, but I wanted to really dive into an actual scenario so that it becomes clear that like time is actually quite fundamental to the services we provide.
That's super interesting. That's awesome. That's super, super cool. And totally, definitely did not go over time. A couple follow-up questions for you though. One, what was the metric of success in that specific use case? I assume that this is like you guys actually ran this study. You guys actually implemented your technology onto this platform. So what was the metric of success that you looked like? Did you look at, the number of bounced payments, like reducing the number of bounced payments? Did you look at, the number, I guess, yeah, that's my first question. The second question is, what's the percentage yield that you saw? Like how much were you able to increase that metric of success?
Metrics are complex, but so just to clarify the situation, so it's a consumer mobile application. That's where you apply for the loan. That's where you manage the process of repayments. You can connect various instruments. You can, go in there and make a credit card transaction. You can set up an auto debit, et cetera. So it was a real production system. So that's the context in which we constructed the repayment dates and the repayment notices and support functions. The metrics would be, yes, reduce bounce rate, reduce late payment so that you avoid late payment fees. Sometimes it's increase early repayments so that you actually kind of earn rewards and benefits, et cetera. There's other confounders. There's other things going on in terms of their lives, their financial lives, et cetera. So it's, a lot of times it's hard to kind of reduce inference to one particular factor. But when we generally ran experiments on this, city-based and in other ways of segmenting it, it was pretty clear that the impact was kind of significant on the order of single-digit to low 10-digit percentage rates, which in lending is actually quite significant. But on a broader perspective, we built a company that was acquired for $185 million in 4 years, and it's now valued at something like 1.8 billion. It's one of the largest credit providers in India, and there were a lot that were built around the same period. And I think if we hadn't done a lot of this kind of development, I don't think we would have gotten that consumer product to that stage. So kind of like I'm throwing some big macro numbers at you versus the more narrow ones, but that's also I think you always kind of want to do that. You want to measure at the micro and then measure at the macro as well, because of just like the complexity of the world.
That's awesome. That's super, super cool. I mean, yeah, and honestly, single digit to low tens is in terms of getting folks to pay early or not miss payment date. That's pretty huge. Like that's a considerable amount of revenue.
Like an e-commerce conversion rate, a 5 to 10% conversion rate bump would be massive. Like or any sort of consumer app. If you can get your conversion rate to move, multiple percent, whether I don't know if you're talking relative percent or percentage points, but either way, that's a significant change.
Yeah. No, timing is a really cool phenomenon. I'll give you a quick example. Another one, right? Think about wallet share of a food delivery app. So Aampe is used by a lot of food delivery apps in Africa, in Asia, Europe. And I'll give you an example of one in Southeast Asia where they thought about timing. So food, right? I think we all love food. I definitely love food. And we eat in some degree, again, on a pattern, breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Although we all know that like some people eat lunch at 2 p.m. and some people eat it at 11 a.m. and some people fast. And there's all the diversity that stands, there's still some kind of pattern, right? And so most businesses lean heavily on those patterns in whatever business context and model industry they work in. And so this particular food delivery app would set up their life cycle marketing to reflect those patterns. And what they did was schedule a lot of their notifications and user communication around lunch and dinner. They had seen historically that people tended to order food less around breakfast. And so they kind of like concentrated their traffic at lunch and dinner. But I'm also a big believer that like in a world of diversity, that patterns really don't give us the kind of returns that we want, and that we don't need to have, that we can over pattern things. And so, for example, with this app, when they started to use Aampe as part of their infrastructure, we widened the scope, and instead of making a rule-based decision about when to tell people about an opportunity to order food, we put guardrails on it and then let the synthetic agents kind of like move the times around. And I remember at one point, about 3 or 4 months into this app using us, one of the core marketing team in Kuala Lumpur in Malaysia sent me an email in the late afternoon, or I guess it was early afternoon. It sent me an email and it was like, "Hey, Paul, somebody on the team got a food delivery notification last night at like 10:15 p.m. And they were concerned about the user experience of sending a food delivery notification at 10:15 p.m. And they're like, we're worried. We never send notifications that late." And they kind of had the assumption that like, because they send it based on rules, that we were probably sending everybody at that time. So we just kind of opened up their instance, kind of looked through some of the patterning around the distribution of send times. And we saw very quickly, no, that wasn't happening, that it was about 4 to 7% of people who were receiving about 3 to 5 days a week, around 4 to 7% of the people who received a food delivery notification were receiving it between 9 p.m. and 11:30 p.m. So again, we said guardrails. We don't send any notification. In their case, they set it such that you don't send any notification earlier than 7 a.m. and you don't send any later than 11:30 p.m. So initial relief, like, okay, you're not blasting everybody, but okay, why are we sending these? But then we just look and you can kind of sort of see the sequence of effect, the metrics. And they saw that like, wow, the conversion rate on those notifications of those customers was really high for those 4 to 7% of users. And so then they were like, wow, that's really cool. Like, why are we not, like, maybe we should be sending more, what's going on here? And I said, wait a second, it's not that we should be sending more because somehow late night notifications work. The models kind of asymptoted, they explored, and then they kind of leveled off at 4 to 7%. So then they're like, all right, well, what is this? Maybe we can come up with a segment. And so we looked, and they kind of did a deep dive, and we saw that only about 32% of those users had ever done a late night food delivery order before. So it was not like you do a segmentation, you find late night orderers and you send them a notification. They hadn't done it before. So that was really cool. And then what we did is dive in. I think they did some offline user research, and what the conclusion they came to was basically these are folks in Kuala Lumpur and Singapore who work on further west time zones. So both of these cities are very international, very like a lot of finance, et cetera. And many of them are like me right now. It's 10:48 in Singapore right now. I'm usually on the phone between 9 p.m. and 12 p.m. with team in the US, with team in Europe, et cetera. And so the situation you're in when you're on a series of Zoom calls late in the evening is you get tired. Calls are tiring. You're speaking, you're working through problems, et cetera. And so you need energy, right? But the problem is you can't you're not downtown. You can't step out on the street and get a snack. Things are closed. It's like, it's just weird, right? So you're stuck with what you have in your refrigerator. Often not so exciting. So the thing is like, you don't think about your food delivery service in that context, but if you get exposed to an idea and you're like, oh, wow, I can get my favorite protein smoothie in 15 minutes before my next call, and I don't have to do anything. I just pick up my phone and just like complete the process. That's amazing. Like, that's super cool. And it's really interesting to realize that, like, obviously the food delivery app loves that, But when we think about it from a customer perspective, a consumer perspective, most of us are rigid in our expectations for a particular business. We think about the context in which we use them in a very simple way. Like, we use them for this. I use them for ordering dinner, or I use them for ordering lunch. Late night snack? It's obvious in retrospect, but it just doesn't happen. And so the idea there is that the timeliness of the communication is exposing them to an opportunity that they hadn't thought about. And the timeliness is connected to the use case, which is, you want to kind of expand that. So anyway, like, that's another example where you kind of very clearly, concretely realize that if you send the notification at your normal times, you're not accessing that other use case that actually can increase wallet share for your business. That you can get somebody and not just continue to get them ordering dinner regularly, but actually get another part of their wallet, which is their late night snack wallet.
You said a lot of things that are fascinating there. First, and I recognize that I'm an idiot, but synthetic agents sounds like bad guys, and I thought that was funny, and I had to not laugh when you said synthetic agents. Second, I love that you talked about the use case side of things. And that's something that Ibby and I talk about all the time. There's a framework I like called breadth, depth, and frequency. And basically you think about, what is the primary use case that someone is coming to your app, your product for? And the first thing you want to do is get them to go deep on that, become habitual in that, or regular in that. And so whether it's engagement in the app or browsing or shopping or solving the problem, but they're consistently solving a problem with your product. And then you go to breadth and you try and expand how many problems they're solving with your app. And so that's exactly what you're talking about here, right? Like, these people were already users. They'd already ordered food, but it was a dinner or a lunch thing. And this notification added a use case. And likely once that unlock was done and they realized, oh, I don't have to feel bad about ordering food during my workday. It feels weird ordering delivery at 10:30 at night, but like, it's not bad. This is what I need to do. It probably unlocked a lot more repetition and frequency of that use case for most of that population. So that's really, really cool. Something I want to dive into a little bit is sort of around that last bit around figuring out the different use cases and life cycle stages. I could see if the whole algorithm is like looking for new use cases constantly for all users, like that's valuable, but it's skipping that first step of really establishing a primary use case and that frequency or depth there. Is there something that your tool is doing, or a way you're thinking about it? I'm like, hey, for people in this, like new users, we want to establish depth, and then midterm users, we want to establish frequency, and then late term users, we want to add breadth, and then if we see engagement starting to dip, we're pulling back in that kind of hierarchy, or kind of how do you think about the different objectives based off of how long someone's been a user, what type of user they are?
There's a lot of trade-off decisions and prioritization decisions that have to do with like your brand and the business you want to go in, and long-term effects that really any kind of AI is not really good at solving for yet. And you have to have and be able to make those decisions. But what I think is really cool is that increasingly you can inform that in a way with your analytics, in a way to then guide it and give it space to explore, that allow it to continue to explore. So, for example, if you're really focused on some core use case, you can kind of give instructions to sort of say, dive into that use case. But what you can also realize is that the value propositions around that core use case can still potentially be diverse, where that's where you want the explorer in the agent to happen. So for example, like your core preference may be to kind of just get people to experience lunch with you. But if you think about the value of lunch, lunch is not just lunch. There's some value associated with it. And so that value might be a convenience. You're super strapped today. You have a lot going on. You need to order something super easy and convenient, payment setup, et cetera. That's the value proposition. That's what you care about. But somebody else is like, it's the beginning of the year and they're focused on their health goals and they're trying to bulk up, right? And they're lifting weights and they know they have to massively increase their protein intake. And so like the simple rice and salad or whatever is not good enough. They need access to more, right? So then the health benefit is the value proposition. The reason you're ordering is because you want something that's more bulky, that's more protein or something like that, right? For another person, it might be that like they're made aware of a discount that's special for them and affordability is what matters. Another person is that like they're not doing so well. They're kind of depressed. They're bored, whatever. And eating well is a way of introducing joy into their life. And that's actually a really effective method for them. They don't want another boring hamburger or whatever they've been eating all the time. They want to like, eat Japanese food that reminds them of that awesome trip to Tokyo that they took 2 years ago, right? So the point is, right, you can like, you decided that you really wanted to focus on lunch for whatever reason, maybe because you believe that that is the best way to get somebody onboarded, or maybe because operational reasons, that's when you have delivery people, or like that's what your restaurant or your service is best at doing, right? But you can still realize that there's still variety that you want a synthetic agent to explore. And that's your job to figure out where they should explore and where they should sort of follow your instructions. And I think the cool thing is to realize that like we often think on one or two dimensions, and there's actually so much beneath any given dimension that you should be exploring. Because you're going to find value, you're going to find marginal value that can compound in that exploration.
If someone, whether it's an e-commerce store or, any sort of mobile SaaS app, kind of, consumer SaaS app, was really trying to explore whether it's different messaging. Well, let's stick with timing. I think this question makes more sense on timing. What are the other approaches that like someone could do? We heard what Aampe's doing, and that makes a world of sense. But like, you are solving a problem differently than what other solutions are. So if someone wasn't going to use synthetic agents to do all this, what are the other options out there that they are kind of forced to try and solve?
Yeah, in a world where budgets are being trimmed, and you kind of need to prove out, hey, I want to be able to buy an Aampe. What is the Google Sheets version of Aampe that you can use to like try and hack your way around proving out that send time optimization really does work for your business? What are some pieces of advice that you'd have for listeners at maybe some of those smaller brands?
It's not the answer you want, but I'm going to challenge the assumption, right? It's actually in a world of scarcity and lower budgets, it's exactly when you want to do this. I'll give you one of my favorite examples. One of my favorite technologies, we'll step back from AI for a second, right? One of my favorite technologies, I think, Sean, you and I have actually talked about this a couple of years ago, but I think Excel is incredible. Think about that like the business of Excel. Like it was created 30, 40 years ago, and the revenue it generates, it's a different product than it was, but is it really? I mean, like for the non-macro ninjas amongst us, right? That the basic functionality is the same and it's just generated. But what is it done? It's kind of like this amazing thing. There's this famous German poet, Goethe, and he made this statement of something like the world turns on the invention of double entry bookkeeping. Or the double entry bookkeeping is the most incredible invention of the world. Something double entry bookkeeping. What is it even? It's like this super boring accounting practice, but it changed the world. And think about spreadsheets. 50 years ago, they were not part of business. Now they are basic business literacy. If you can't use a spreadsheet, you're not even close to a business, right? You're not like everybody uses them. They're so universally like legible as a tool. They're just flexible, modular as a tool. But again, like we're not far away. Our parents lived in a world that they didn't exist. And I once heard this fascinating Planet Money podcast on it, which introduced this realization to me, right? With basically certain financial firms that would use them would take big rolls of stock paper, right? And you would unroll it over the table in order to let you create these multiple sheets that you need to track things. Now, what happens when you're writing on paper your spreadsheet in order to let you do the calculations that you need to do? If you make a mistake, right, if you want to change a parameter or a variable, you got to go back. So people didn't use them. They didn't use, they were obviously an awesome technology in terms of just matrix, like calculations wise, running business models. But we didn't use them because if you had pen and paper, it didn't really work, right? But now you have to, right? And so I think to a certain extent, certain computational changes that are happening are not, they're not esoteric. They're not the future. They need to be like the basics. They're most important for small businesses. They're not like the stretch. They are actually going to be the thing that you have to adopt, because if you don't, you're incredibly inefficient. Now, I think the way you construct this technology, I mean, the reason we wanted to do this was we knew as data scientists that like this was the obvious way to do analytics and to try to optimize experiences and create good consumer businesses, and that not everybody was a Meta with that kind of, or a TikTok or a Netflix with that kind of data science team. And so you wanted to kind of build infrastructure that you could push out and let a business use in a way that would like incrementally grow revenue. So CFO has no need for justification. It's like, obviously we'd use it, and it's not about the price, it's about the ROI. But I think there are so many ways that you can just kind of go down that road, among which are taking any standard way you interact with customers and removing some of the strict borders you've put on because you believe that is the best practice. I think one of the biggest things we do is we try a couple of things, and then we find one that works, and then we build up this rigidity in our minds that that's the right way to do it. And almost in so many cases, the basic statistical process that's happening in our brain is overfitting. In a technical terms, overfitting means you got a data set and you looked at a pattern there, and you found that pattern and you decided that pattern extrapolates to everything else when it absolutely does not. And so just breaking that module and sort of saying all the things I do, how can I introduce volatility into my life in a regular basis, or into my business on a regular basis? How can I expose myself to upside as long as my downside is limited, right? So you don't want to risk your whole business on it, but you want to systematically introduce volatility, systematically introduce variance into whatever you're doing. In statistical terms, we would call that the treatment. The thing you're trying, do more trying as a regular practice. And I think that's something you can absolutely do. And that again, statistically, you do that 10 times, you're going to pay off with 2 or 3 that are just going to be like, blow your mind in terms of what it opens for your business, what like new use cases, like core changes in your positioning. A lot of that just comes from running more experiments. Yeah.
That's super cool. So a couple of things. One, I looked it up, Excel 1985. So it's almost 40 years old.
Yeah.
And I heard this on a podcast one time, and I've stuck with it. I think it's so true that the number one competitor for any software is like a Google sheet or a spreadsheet.
That's right.
Like we're all solving our problems through just like these cells. So fascinating tool. You're absolutely right. I really liked what you were saying around the idea of like, hey, you run a test or you do one thing, and that, whether it's based off of your calendar, for whatever reason, you did something and that becomes kind of like the way you do things. I think about that all the time of like, what are the biases that we either ran one single test or looked at one email or something and saw that, hey, Tuesdays people open the email more, so we're going to send all our emails on Tuesday for the rest of eternity because that's what we did. And so now we build our production schedule off of like a Tuesday send. So Monday's QA, Friday is the final review, Thursday's design. It's like you backwards plan off of something, and it's based off of your schedule instead of the user. So I think that's fascinating. When you think about like introducing this variance, you're obviously, in order to tell these synthetic agents what's winning and what's not, and whether this treatment is performing better than the control or not. You have to have a metric you're optimizing for. And in my experience, and I think you and I spoke about this a little bit at MAU a couple of years ago, Paul, I think what happens when you use some built-in tools from, an ESP, which every ESP is integrating ML and AI into it now, all marketing tools are, but you have to think about what is like their driving purpose and like what's in it for them, right? It's the same reason you don't just look at Facebook ad reporting and say that these are my exact numbers. Like you want Google Analytics to be there or something else to be there to be like, well, this is multi-touch. It's not that simple. If everyone grades their own homework, it's not like through some like nefarious scheme of like, hey, we're going to obfuscate the facts to make us look good. But if you're an email platform, you're likely optimizing for when is someone most likely to open an email, because that's like the data point you get. You're getting that data point, and it also, selfishly makes your platform look good. If member turns on find optimized send time, and they can say, look, you turned this on and your open rates went up 15%, like we're winning. But in and of itself, I don't give a shit if someone opens my email. I care about if someone converts from that. And the email is a means to get a conversion. It is not a conversion in and of itself, right? And so how do you, I think to me, that's what's always stuck with me about what differentiates AMP from some of these other tools, where you're billing your optimized time not just on a single conversion, but it's sort of like incremental conversions that they wouldn't have had, right? Like it's not just the most time someone's most likely to buy. I can predict that a little bit just based off how much they're using my app or site, how close, how they added the cart. Like we can start to get those data points, but it's like an additional sale, an additional purchase, an additional app usage beyond what we would think of. That's that extra use case. And so is that kind of like the main differentiator on how you guys think about optimizing for this stuff?
The thing is, we all know that life is crazily complex, right? We all know this. Like, you wouldn't survive if you didn't know this in your bones, in your practical experience. But then we put our professional hats on and we like to, which includes reporting, up to bosses, et cetera. And we like to, and we end up just like kind of living simplistically in a world where it's super simple. And the quality of our tools have sort of lured us in that direction. And so we are forced to pick a single conversion metric when we know that's not how it works. Like there are trade-offs. You tell somebody that an offer is too good to be true. You tell them, here's a discount. You will increase maybe interest in the sense of like surprise or like, I got to check this out. It doesn't mean that will actually lead to more purchases, because they were really just like, the classic example is unfortunately you put pornography in, you're going to increase your open rate, right? But like, because people are curious, like they're just shocked, right? So they look in, right? But it doesn't. So there's those kind of factors in terms of like a traditional funnel, but then there's also just in terms of the fact that like, what does it actually take to get a person to do that final thing? There is more that's involved. I think about a lot of like B2B stuff. As AMP grows, we often think about like, how do people become aware of us? And it is not a simple conversion cycle. It's not, I send you a cold email, you open the email, you agree to a call, I give you a demo and you're like, yeah, let's book AMP. It doesn't work that way. You have to think that like there's a much longer journey of becoming aware, and then sort of becoming aware and then seeing in a different context. And then it's like this much bigger process. So the practical thing I think is that like that is oftentimes a process that we do because of our limitation computationally as humans, but also our limitation that's been forced on us by the way we've constructed a tool so far. The truth is that computationally under the hood, we are not limited to track one thing. Numbers are easy to parse. They're easy to multiply. Like you can do a lot of math behind the scenes to regularly establish the relationship between every possible touch point. And again, there's a lot of complexity there, but like max out the math that you can do on those things. There's no reason not to do it. And either what you'll get is no visible signal or visible signal, right? But like the process of you choosing one conversion match, and that's why like, I think a lot about this is sort of like, I wanted to, and we talk about this with a lot of folks on our team, right? We wanted to be able to sort of say, what can you do instead of using AMP? What can you do as just like a basic kind of get started? And I still try and think about this often, like what are the basic things you can do? But I'm also just really convinced that what we should be doing is demanding more of our software. We shouldn't rely on our current stacks and just be like, well, that's how it is. It's like, actually, it's just design problems that we can move past with better design software. So like you give credit to everything's incorporating ML and AI these days. And it's like, actually, not really. Like a lot of stuff is incorporating it purely in visual schematic work, right? And you can, if you just look under the hood, you can validate it for yourself. Look at their blogs, look at the way they talk about things. You see that there's nothing below pasting AI in the header. And I think like the whole industry, as business people, as we build businesses, the most important thing about like getting educated, I think that's why I enjoyed it when we first met, Sean, in a conversation we had, is I got excited when I see people who are not necessarily specialists in data science or computation, et cetera, asking hard questions, like going beyond the mark, not being like, oh, they do AI, but I don't have the budget. No. Like, be like, wait a second, are they doing AI? How could it help me? How does it actually, right? Like those hard questions, I think, are what we need the buy side to do so that we drive higher quality, so that more of the fluff SaaS goes out of business faster. Which is a hard thing to say, but like it needs to happen so that we just have more clarity, so that then we can, build better businesses. And that's that positive virtuous cycle. So yeah, like that's my rant about actually, we just gotta demand better software more regularly.
Paul, thank you so much for coming on today. Is there anything that you want to pub? I know we pubbed AMP. Anything else, like where, if our users want to find AMP, where would they go? If our users want to talk to you, where would they go? What's the best way to reach you?
Yeah, amp.com. I'm also on LinkedIn, a bit on X, Twitter, not as active there. Email is paul@amp.com. Happy to have a conversation. Lots of folks on the team are also very gregarious and friendly and happy to chat. And also there's just like a lot of cool stuff out there that we try and write a lot about stuff that, is not AMP necessarily. It's sort of introducing methods and introducing ways of thinking about problems that are, becoming aware of banded algorithms versus A/B tests. I think these are just like useful things to do. Yeah, but it was great chatting with you guys. Looking forward to hearing more of your episodes. You guys drive a lot of interesting conversations. Thank you again for patience with some of my longer rants.
No. Thanks so much for coming on. This is perfect. And yeah, everyone check out amp.com, AAMPE.com. Thanks so much, Paul.